We are so happy to be back. How are you, ethnically correctors? We missed you terribly, and we are so happy that we are convoked. We are convoked by the spirit of ethnicity, and we are very glad to be here with you. I'm Alex Venegas, and as always, I'm joined by two pristine women. To my left is Winter White. How are you, Winter?
I'm doing good. Happy to be back.
Good to have you. And to my right is Miss Tehu Smythe.
Happy to be here as well. Thank you.
So I know you've missed us. We've missed you dearly. We were just having a convivial conversation about how good it is to be loved and how good it is to be gathered to have this conversation that we call ethnically correct. We are very excited because we got a lot of responses on our previous topic when we discussed Beyonce's Formation video. And Winter, you were the mistress of discussion on that video. And so what did we hear back from our listeners?
You know, I saw that there were a lot of people that had, very serious opinions about what we are doing here and why we were doing this and, why we even came up with the topic of discussion. And let me tell you, it was cray. Some people had some crazy things to say from, we're race baiting to, not even really listening to the podcast, but just looking at the description of the podcast and then being kind of pissed off by that and commenting. And so we kind of got read a little bit. We got a little bit of shade, but it was all good because also, though, I found that with that podcast, we probably had the most engagement of any podcast that we've posted. And I think, that's what we wanted. We want to kind of get the conversation going and we wanted to talk about something very current. I think that was the very first time that we talked about something that was going on specifically now. And I think people had, huge reactions over it because it was so current and maybe because there were still kind of some intense feelings about that. And then there were some people who just saw, is Beyonce black? And they were like, duh. And then didn't read, listen
Right.
to the podcast.
And we're living in a political climate that is very, very intensified. Yeah. And race is a discussion that is permeating the primary season. And we see various presidential contenders using that as a topic of discussion and polarizing people to the extent that they see something from us and they think, well, are you helping or hurting the discussion? And so I do want to recommend, that those that are in our audience, if you want to engage with us, please do so. We are an open group, and we love hearing feedback. We love hearing commentary because we are. We believe in reciprocity, and we believe in open channels. And part of a free and open society mandates that we have open ears. That's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Because we have to be astute listeners. And so, but as Winter said, listen to us, listen to the podcast so that you can get a glimpse into our ideas, our minds, our ears, and our hearts. And in that fashion, we can be a family. Isn't that right, Tehu?
Absolutely.
And now on to our next topic. The month of February calls us to celebrate a variety of things. Number one, we are called to celebrate Black History Month in this country that we call the United States of America. We've had quite a journey with our African-American brothers and sisters, and we take a month to celebrate a lot of achievement, a lot of success, and that we've had in the area of race relations. But we also remember the struggle and how many individuals, namely people like Martin Luther King and others, have endured to bring our nation to the current place it's in vis-a-vis civil rights, voting rights, etc. We also have Valentine's Day, where we
That's
remember
right.
that we need to love more than hate, and that loving is a good thing. And loving, we sort of extol people to the highest echelon.
It makes the world go round.
It absolutely does.
And most importantly, to love yourself,
Very important.
So. That is, a lot of times we forget that. And then we also celebrate President's Day, right? We celebrate the 46 men that have shaped this nation since its inception. And so when we look at the broad range of things that we celebrate in the month of February, we are, especially with relation to the presidency, we decided to take a moment to talk about what it means to be intelligent, and more specifically, what it means to be a culturally intelligent person. This podcast dedicates a lot of time and space to the idea of cultural competence, but we're going to raise the stake and we're going to delve into what it means to be a culturally intelligent person, how that is manifest, and what that means, and what are some of the ramifications for us as members of a very culturally heterogeneous society. So Tehu Smythe, you had the courage and the conviction to bring this forward as a topic, and you're going to help us with the definition of what it means to be culturally intelligent.
So we have lots of different kinds of intelligences in our cultures, respectively. For a very long time, the measure of intelligence was done through the IQ, which obviously everyone knows, and everyone assumed this was a very valid measure of intelligence. However, as sort of we've progressed and evolved in civilizations, we've realized that there's other types of intelligence. Another one is emotional intelligence, which is talked about a lot at the moment. And that is the ability to be in tune and to be able to empathize with someone else's emotions, feelings at the time. So some people have higher levels of this naturally, others not so much. There's also a version now of intelligence called culture intelligence, which for a very long time was dismissed, especially as a measure of intelligence, because the people that were administering the tests were predominantly tests of intelligence were predominantly white Caucasian background, and they were testing for a particular level of cognitive and mathematical ability, which you would have if you were in a privileged kind of educational environment. But it had huge cultural biases attached to it. And a lot of particularly African-American people were dismissed as not being intelligent because of this. And this was a scenario. They bring a lot of students from sort of the impoverished areas into very fancy universities, which is awkward in the first instance, put them in these awkward situations where they are being tested on things they may not have had a lot of familiarity with, and then we're kind of dismissed, and not obviously, and why would you score well on a test like that? And then being dismissed as, oh, so this kind of race is not intelligent, completely inaccurate, and hugely discriminatory if you think about it today. Cultures have, if they may not have this level of IQ intelligence as much, but that's because they may also not have had the same amount of privilege. However, there are other intelligences which are so that their level is so much higher on, which they're now struggling to measure and catch up with. But we're quite behind on this, and this has only been a recent discovery, maybe 20, 30 years at the most. So it's caused a lot of damage and a lot of problem into people's lives, I think, for just kind of being dismissed as, which is, it can have real serious repercussions when you're dismissed at a very young age as not being intelligent at all, and that's what it was done. Originally, the IQ came out to be able to test people for that, so you could so you could place people. Was it for the military? I think it was originally, right. Yeah.
And then when you tested for gifted and talented, I remember when I took that test, there were all these spatial relational types of tests that were given to me, and I had to make sense of them. And I wasn't necessarily the best at it, but I was still deemed gifted and talented. But I remember being very, very afraid of not doing well, because then I would be a regular kid. And my parents had always invested in my educational trajectory by buying me all these little gadgets, whatever they could, right? Because they wanted me to succeed, because I was an only child, I was the only hope. And Winter, I think we've talked in the past about what it means when you're in Long Beach and you're going through the public school system there, and how you're sort of gauged, right? And the standardized testing that we had to go through here in California.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know in your experience what that was like.
You know, standardized testing for me when I was in school wasn't as big of a deal as it is right now. But I do have a little brother who is going through that right now. And, you know, it's almost like the teachers have to teach to the test. It's not about whether or not the student is understanding the curriculum, but it's we have to cover this. And we only have this amount of time in which to cover it. And we're not looking at, you know, how fast a student learns or how they learn or what's a better way to teach this specific student. It's no, we have this amount of time and we got to get it in, you know, before the semester is up. So, you know, I've seen my little brother struggle and, you know, kind of be put off from school because he's an intelligent kid. He loves science. He loves to read. This is someone who is always wanting to learn. But because the school system is just so because it's structured in the way that it is right now and it's all about testing, you know, you would think that this kid isn't intelligent because of the way that they're teaching now, you know.
So being in the mental health field and obviously training to be a marriage and family therapist, we become very familiar with testing and evaluation and assessment. And there is a place for it, definitely. There is a reason why you have to assess people. But you also have to, it goes back to what we mentioned in an earlier show, the read of a person is just as valid, you know? You can't just base an assessment on a person without looking at the whole context. Yeah. You have to look at what they sound like, what they look like as well, how they talk, what the words are they, you know, what the context of those words is. It's a whole package. You can't just look at one area and then place a judgment and immediate assessment on that. That's inaccurate. And, you know, that goes on people's records for life.
Right.
It gets attached to them and then, you know, things kind of progress from there. There is something I wanted to actually bring to your guys' attention, which I thought was really interesting. It came up in one of my classes, and this very much talk is about this cultural intelligence. And there's a test. It's called BITCH, and it stands for Black Intelligent Test of Cultural Homogeneity, and it's by Williams, and it came out in 1972. Very interesting test. So this test basically was administered and given to Black people, and it was an attempt to show this very thing that we're talking about, this cultural intelligence. There are questions on this test which, if you are from a particular ethnicity, you're going to have familiarity with. So let me read you one of them, which is very interesting. This may or may not be valid because, I mean, it is 1972, but I just thought it was very interesting, and it kind of came out to kind of prove the point that the IQ is not as valid as what people thought it was for years. So one of the questions is, for example, there's words, and you have to pick what you think the word is, sort of corresponds to. So the first word here is boot. So is a boot A, a cotton farmer, B, Black, C, Indian, or D, a Vietnamese citizen? Any guesses?
The word is boot.
Yeah.
And it's either, what are the options again?
A, a cotton farmer, B, Black, C, Indian, or D, a Vietnamese citizen.
I'd say Black.
Correct.
The Black girl got it right.
Yes.
Next one, clean. A, just out of the bathtub. B, very well dressed. C, very religious. Or D, has a great deal.
Well, I would say either A or B.
I'd say B.
B is correct.
Yeah.
So this just shows that we are familiar with kind of cultural intelligence automatically. Because if you were white, your answer would be A, just out of the bathtub. And there have been tests to measure this. And I think that's so interesting. One last one, guys. And I think we're all going to get this one right. Blood. A, a vampire. B, a dependent individual. C, an injured person. Or D, a brother of color.
Brother of color.
Brother of
Obviously.
color.
Isn't that interesting? I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly the vampire
I
one.
remember specifically to this day when I learned what being clean was in a culturally rich perspective, and it's a day that I was dirty during the day because we were cleaning up at school, and then I went home and showered and put on a suit, and because we had a gala event, and then this girl's like, "Oh, you clean up well," and then I turned around and I said, "Excuse me." She's like, yeah, you clean up well, which means that you know how to get yourself looking presentable and stylish and well groomed, right? So what people would say, oh, you know, you in other cultures, they might say, oh, you are dressed to the nines.
To the nines, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In other contexts. And all of these expressions are very, very specific,
Yes.
right? And
And that is what this particular test was measuring, the cultural understanding of particular words.
Right.
Because for a long time it was very biased and very presumptuous of the IQ to assume that, you know, everyone's going to answer this in the same way. Not if you're from a different culture, you won't.
yes, and I think having the cultural intelligence to know when to use certain words and in what contexts will get you very far. So a couple of thoughts. Number one is I know that a lot of students put a lot of emphasis into getting outstanding grade point averages. Upper middle class and wealthy parents send their kids to after school tutoring, and they want them to get amazing SAT scores so they can go into the best colleges and universities. So, but then they graduate from Harvard, and then they get to their first job. So I know a lot of people that, for example, went to Harvard and then they got into this program called Teach for America. And a lot of us aren't familiar with it, right? They take the best kids, the best graduates, new teaching recruits, and then they send them to really tough neighborhoods because that's where they are going to make the most impact or have the most impact.
That's actually very admirable. I didn't know that's what they
Teach
did.
for America. It's huge, right?
That's a fantastic
So,
idea.
but invariably they have to go through a cultural immersion course before they get to the schools because they have
Which
to
makes
know
sense.
they have to know what they're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And that they can't use certain expressions, they can't use certain terminology. They can't tell the kids, "Oh, don't be monkeys now." Because to somebody in suburbia, being a monkey, that means that maybe you're just being foolish and jumping around. But if you are in a primarily black or Hispanic environment, if you call someone a monkey, there are going to be very hurtful connotations to the word.
That actually brings up a story that happened with my little brother when he was in elementary school. So he had a teacher who took away a toy that he was playing with. So she put it in her desk, and then at the end of school, my brother, remembering that it was in her desk, and by the way, he's in like the 3rd grade at this time, remembering that it was in her desk, he got it out of her desk to take it home. So she was really upset. She called my mom and she said, Noah stole his toy out of my desk. And my mom said, Noah stole his toy? Or did he take his toy back? And the word stole was such a huge deal because my mom said, when you put that word on a black boy, I don't know if you understand the stigma with that. And it was his toy. So I don't think you want to use the word stolen. You know, and that was really huge. And I think the teacher thought, well, what's the big deal? But my mom was like, no, I don't want my son to be labeled as a thief because that's what people will think. If you write this in his record or if you take this, you know, further, that's what you're saying. Like, yes, he should not have had the toy. No, he shouldn't have got it out of your desk. But let's use some other terminology other than stolen.
Yes.
You know,
and that's huge.
Yeah.
Because the words we associate to people have a lot of impact on a society's evaluation, right?
Right.
When we say the word thug, when we use this terminology, there's an automatic association, right? And I think that's why even the SAT, so the testing board, which owns this Scholastic Aptitude Test, which we've all taken to get into college, decided that they needed to get away from just word memorization, which is supposed to be a very strict measure of your IQ, of this intelligence quotient. And they've gone more into a reading comprehension style of measuring, right? Because they realize in today's society, just memorizing words isn't going to do you any favor. I mean, I go through this all the time. I have a big vocabulary, and I get, instead of people celebrating it, it's ridiculed. It's like, oh my God, this is the guy that uses the big words. Like, calm down. Like, nobody uses those words anymore. That's so antiquated. It's more about how you're able to function in a team, or how are you able to take words and make people really change behavior or take some action. We are so inundated these days with words, because we're constantly reading, constantly tweeting, constantly posting, that you need to stand out for other ways. So it's the contextual use of language that is important. And so being culturally competent then becomes even more important, because if you're trying to target, let's say if you're a movie studio and you have a movie with Kevin Hart and with a primarily black cast, how do you market that movie to a primarily white audience? What is going to be the verbiage or the terminology that you're going to use that is going to be specific and culturally competent? And I think that that's really, really important. And something we had talked about earlier is,
I just wanted to add to that quickly, Alex. We historically haven't added a lot of value to cultural competence because we haven't seen it as relevant. And it's good news that we're getting around to this, much anticipated and a bit late, but better late than never. But it's good news that we're actually accessing it and understanding it, because it didn't happen for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think, and it's really also critical for business.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah, because if I'm talking to a primarily Indian audience, for example, and I say the word, "Don't screw this up," well, an Indian audience might say to me, "Well, screw is almost, it's maybe analogous to intercourse, right?" And so people get very, very taken aback when they're caught off guard with terminology that is used. And, nowadays, I think we're very relaxed about the way that we use words, but we have to realize that they can have some significance. Now, whether that makes us a little too sensitive and maybe makes us hold back what we really think, and whether that is a good or bad thing, is something that we really need to talk about, right? Because I think what we're seeing in the current political discourse is everyone loves Donald Trump because he says what's on his mind without any filter.
There's something to be said about conduct, and with different cultures, you have to adapt, and there's a conduct and a formality that's in place. For example, in Asian Japanese culture, it's a very formal culture. There's two different ways to use you. There's a formal way and there's a casual way. Also in the French language, in my language, in Farsi, there's a conduct that goes with that, and it's a formality. And it's all good and well to be relaxed and to be slang and to be hip and cool, but when you're dealing particularly in a business environment, those things are even more important, because it's a matter of losing the deal altogether. If you're insulting and you are not respectful, Japanese people again are very courteous, so if you don't understand those things, you just come across as really terse and I don't know what's the right word.
Nasty?
Yeah, nasty and just inappropriate, really unkept.
Yeah.
Well, to piggyback off of kind of what you were saying, with this whole Donald Trump thing, and, everybody is kind of applauding him for speaking his mind. I think that my issue with Donald Trump is not that he has opinions, because I think everybody has opinions. They can only come from, where they've been in life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I get it. I get why he has his opinions. He's a white man, very privileged white man. So from his perspective, he's correct in the way that he feels. But I think that there is a way to intelligently express how you feel without hurting another group of people. And if you haven't figured that out, if you don't know how to diplomatically enter a room and express whether it's a fear or a frustration or whatever the case may be, without alienating the people in this country who are a part of this country and pay taxes and, are as much citizens as you are, then you don't need to be the president of the United States.
I couldn't agree more.
Yes. I think you hit on something that's really important, and it goes with cultural competence. David Brooks, who is this very famous conservative columnist for the Wall Street Journal, wrote a piece, and I've shared this with many people, and it's called "I Miss Barack Obama." And what he was explaining in this piece is that one of the hallmarks of the Obama campaign and the Obama presidency has been this elegance and the way that he uses discourse and intelligence to arrive at his points without denigrating people. So while Donald Trump may say Muslims need to be expatriated and not allowed into this country, Obama goes to a mosque and affirms Muslim Americans to tell them, you know what, you are equally as American as anybody else. You have factions within your religion that are belligerent and violent, but we understand that they are minorities, and yes, that we have implications for our immigration policy, and we need to be a lot more careful because people find themselves into a country to cause harm. But that doesn't mean that the broad majority of people are the way you are. Then Trump says to Mexicans,
which is very diplomatic and insightful. So I would say our president is actually very emotionally intelligent.
Right.
Yes.
But it's funny, like I almost feel like people of color have to be a little bit more emotionally intelligent.
You have to be, because the world doesn't cater to you.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It does not. It never has been. And you're taught that growing up. It's a very valid point.
Well, that kind of brings me to thinking about what we've been taught, growing up about emotional intelligence. What was kind of the lessons that we were taught in our lives about how the world sees us. I'd love to talk about that, because I know for me, I was taught that I would have to work twice as hard as everyone else to get what I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And nothing would be given to me.
Which is, it's interesting. And I was taught the same thing. We're immigrants running away kind of from a country that is in political turmoil. The world is not going to cater to you. They're going to see you as different. You're never going to be in the mainstream culture. You have to adapt yourself as much as you can, however that means, and work twice as hard as the person next to you to get anywhere. But that immigrant work ethic, I think, actually, it builds character.
Yeah.
It builds a real strong core.
Yeah.
And I've had amazing friends growing up that have spanned the cultural gamut, and I think what distinguishes everybody that is successful and an outstanding member of society is that their families instilled in them this work ethic. Or this ethic of how to do well vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And I think all of us share the fact that we grew up in ethnic households. And I think I have a lot of white friends as well that were taught the same thing, that they needed to be outstanding, that they needed to do the best that they could. But what I think is unique about all my white friends is that they were also told that if they could only do so much, they were still okay. Right. They needed to do the best they could. But if that best effort was not necessarily like the top echelon or the lawyer, doctor,
that's good
engineer,
enough.
That's fine, because they put forth the best effort. And I think that kind of advice is really awesome, because it makes you feel like, okay, even if I'm not the greatest, I'm at least a contributing, worthwhile member of society. And I think in ethnic cultures, it's kind of like very binary. It's either you're an amazing success or you're a total failure, and there's no room in between.
Extreme,
right?
Yeah, and I've noticed this, especially in Black culture. It's like, if you're not the famous star athlete or whomever, then your options are so limited. But what if you're just really good at doing math? Well, maybe you do have a career as an accountant. Maybe you have a career as someone who is going to organize the neighborhood block club and et cetera, right? So it's how do we channel this idea in a culturally intelligent way to tell people you do not need to be destined to failure.
Well, is it that we need to tell people that? Because I think the reason why people feel like they have to be dynamic and better than their counterparts is because society has said we're not going to even let you in the door a lot of times unless you are the upper echelon. So there's that thought because we weren't even allowed in the door unless we were better than everyone else. So I think that thought is kind of driven down into different families, because of what we've seen in the world, So I don't think that's an idea that we just want to have and we want to pass down to our children. I think it's because that's been what we've experienced.
Well, I think it's valid that we engage in conversation about this, and I think we want our listeners to educate us on whether it's okay for us to accept. I don't want to say mediocrity, but it just run-of-the-mill normalcy as acceptable for people of ethnic origin.
And I'd also like to add to that. I would love our listeners also to be encouraged to talk about the various different things that your cultures have taught you, which you kind of see as culturally valid and is helpful to you, and that you're able to access and use in your, in the mainstream culture. I would really encourage our listeners to think about that.
And the way you do that, though, is, of course, through Facebook at Ethnically Correct or Twitter, Ethnic Correct. And I'm looking at Winter, and Winter has this amazing glow today, by the way.
Oh,
and looking at that, it reminded me of, and we had talked about this, when did you learn something about another culture that was totally different from what you were taught as a kid? And I was sharing this. My mother, bless her heart, was a woman who had very antiquated ideas that came from her native Mexico. And she used to tell me that Black people had been basically extricated from Africa, saved from animalistic ways by God-fearing Christians, and that they were somehow saved by being brought to this country, and that we should not expect too much from them because they had this animalistic tendency. And I was very shocked by that because everybody that I grew up with did not behave in animalistic ways at all. They were, quite to the contrary, very amazing, elegant, thoughtful people. And so I remember thinking, and there was one particular girl in our class, Maya Winston, hi Maya out there in Texas, who was a very, very intelligent, bright girl who always knew more than the rest of the kids, but she wanted to be cool, so she never let it be known, except that she would get the A, in the class. And so I was like, how could she be animalistic? Because she's better than everybody in the classroom. So, it was that was my aha moment, was 12 years old, entering 7th grade, and this girl knew every single word that we were tested in. And she always had her hair perfectly done. Her grandmother always brought her in this nice new Nissan. In the 90s, Nissan was kind of like the cool car. It was a Nissan Maxima. So I don't know, did you guys ever have moments where you realized, oh, what I've learned about those people is not true?
Tehu, you go. I have to think about this one.
I'm still thinking about it too, to be honest.
Or maybe you guys grew up in very illuminated households that didn't engender this kind of racial sort of stereotypical baggage on other people.
So I'm going to just be honest here.
Okay.
Honesty
Sorry,
always
Mom.
works.
Sorry, Mom. But Alex, you were my first Latino friend that I ever have had that's really super educated. And
oh my God.
Really well-rounded and well-read. Not that I haven't ever had Latino friends in my life, but they weren't as culturally aware. very neighborhood kind of people, Latin gangs and, that kind of thing. So growing up, we kind of looked at Latinos or, some like they are ruining our neighborhoods. They are coming in with trash and leaving the trash, and they're, kids are infiltrating our schools and they're not from here. And, all these things that.
Oh, and some of that stuff is not valid, but it's understandable because of certain behaviors, and that's why in the previous episode I had to check my people to say don't do these things that propagate and promulgate the stereotype.
Yeah.
But and I can understand that. I remember outside of Fauché Learning Center, this black woman was very upset because her kid had not been admitted into the school, and she looked at a Hispanic kid and she's like, "That little MFer, why don't you take him out so that my kid can take that spot in this school where he belongs?" And I felt so bad because I thought to myself, maybe we are taking the spots of people that have been in this community for a very long time, and now they feel displaced.
Well, of course, that's not true. And it's all about what you do with your opportunity. And after, my friendship with you, I realized, and my mother too, so there's saving grace there. That
Hi, Debbie.
there is not, that's not the truth. It's about what you do with your opportunity.
Yes.
And just like we have people, in the Black community that we don't agree with everything that they do, it's the same for every other community, Latino, white, whatever. So
I just discovered why I was having a hard time answering this question, because I've been kind of mulling it over since you asked it, Alex, and I just discovered why. So I didn't grow up in the U.S. I grew up in London, and it's, growing up in London, it's such an international city, and I was at an American school in London, which is even more international. So we had every culture, every ethnicity, and almost every country represented in the school. So we didn't really get the opportunity to get familiarity with stereotypes. The stereotypes were not such a, big... they weren't so they weren't so prevalent. So I think that's why I was struggling to answer that. And because you kind of, when you grow up in a multicultural environment, you kind of give everyone equality. Stereotyping is actually something I've gotten familiar with more so within my time in the US.
Uniquely, I think, or strongly American thing. We pay, while in Europe there is more of an attention to class. In the United States, there's more of an attention to race and culture. And so I think that's something, and it's a testament to our upbringings. And I just have to say that we are all very blessed to know one another and to understand that we enrich each other's lives. And so I have a challenge for our listeners. Find somebody from outside of your racial group and talk to them and try to take them to at least coffee. Okay. Somebody that you've wanted to approach for the last few months and say, can I just grab coffee? Or maybe if you're in the break room, just talk to them and ask them a couple of questions about who they are, what they believe in, and maybe what their greatest passion in life is, just to engender conversation. And I think you will find that it is a huge blessing to know people outside of your group and of your comfort zone, and that they will enrich your lives in ways that you've never, ever imagined.
A great learning experience, if nothing else.
Great learning experience.
That will enlighten
I'm do
you.
That myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, everybody, for listening. This was a great show, and we thank you for your continued support. And we like you to express that support by liking our page, Ethnically Correct, on Facebook or on Twitter at Ethnic Correct. For Winter White, Tehu Smythe, and our amazing producer, Dan Howes, from Santa Monica, California, I'm Alex Venegas. Bye!